Hello my fellow Freedomain Radio listeners. This is a reaction to the show 4063 Murdering Logic. A guy called into the show and presented his model of reality with a semi-poetic language. I don't think it's good enough for the show yet, because I don't know if I can do it on air, but here it is. So, what is metaphysics? Metaphysics studies properties of reality which are universal. That means they are true both for the reality that we discovered, that is included in physics, and that is still undiscovered. One property covers both of these areas. So this is metaphysics, and by using the properties that we know that they have to also cover what we don't know. This is why we can reach somewhere we shouldn't be able to reach. I will explain in a moment. The metaphysics guy was asked to prove his claims, or even ask if his claims in metaphysics are provable. How do you prove something that is not a part of discovered reality? What is the standard of proof in reality in metaphysics should have been his question to begin with. My answer is the standard of proof in metaphysics is Occam's razor. The simplest, most self-evident propositions are better. A model of metaphysics can be so general and so simple while explaining all that is known in physics and so on, that it becomes the only inevitable possibility. It's so general that it covers so much that it leaves no room for anything else. Now, why can we even make claims about metaphysics when it's something that we cannot prove like in practice? Well, maybe we can, we don't know it. But making claims about metaphysics is valid because we are also a part of physics and therefore part of metaphysics. Our brains, our biology and chemistry and so on, they play by the rules of metaphysics. We cannot go in metaphysics against physics itself. We can reinterpret it, reframe it, but we cannot change the facts. We can deviate from reality with adding some extra complexity, extra layers of mythology, but on the other hand, the simpler we make our ideas, the more logical they have to get, bare bones of logic. And the less there is a room for error, and in metaphysics then that means fewer ways for the universe to be, until you get to the simple, only possible way for the universe to be, that is simpler than anything else so far. And in logic that means there is only one possibility. You know the philosophy, the trivium, the first principle of speculative logic, the principles of identity. There is no simpler statement than that. If you know that, this is a very good standard in metaphysics too. This means that the simplest thing we say about the universe must also be the most correct thing about the universe. So what is the simplest thing we can say? When you look at the universe, you see a complex thing. There are many different kinds of stuff that make up the universe. There is matter, there is space, there is consciousness, there is time, and various forms of energy. Now, the simplest thing we can say about that is that all these various stuffs are made of one basic stuff. That's the simplest way for the universe to be. All the other stuffs are real, but they are variations according to some rules of physics, of course, on this one primordial stuff. Now the question is, can this statement be proven? Is there something known in physics that must be this statement? Well, why yes, there is. If you recall the most famous equation in the world, E equals mc squared. That equation says that mass of the matter is made of a whole lot of energy. This is not electric energy or light energy or heat energy. This is simply energy with the capital E. This one substance, this energy with capital E, is responsible for Also, besides matter, it's responsible for consciousness, for information, for space itself, and time, and indirectly for things like gravity or light, which is a very weird thing. If you have some basic knowledge of physics, you will know that these things are interrelated. The matter has mass, and mass is curving space-time, and this curved space-time influences the flow of time. This is what the theory of relativity says. It creates some kind of frame of reference, and it also bends light with this gravitational field, and so we can detect black holes and stuff. It's all interrelated. Some phenomena in physics are tertiary, some are secondary, but they are all more or less directly related to this primary concept of E. This is energy. That is, of course, if you disregard something like infinite parallel universes, which the guy in the podcast also did, and I do. We are pretty much on the same page. I just make a challenge to in a simpler way. And this energy has some known properties. For example, it cannot be created or destroyed. This is the basis not only of thermodynamics, but of our favorite principle of identity. Things are what they are and cannot be their opposite at the same time. That's thanks to this energy. But I want you to understand how unusual is this claim. We see a lot of energy around, various forms, and to claim that there is such a thing that is unique, it is unseen, it is formless, it does not have any existence in time or space, it doesn't need to. It is a very, very extraordinary claim. It had to exist at the beginning of the universe, at the Big Bang. It exists in undiminished capacity for all the age of the universe, and in the end it will still be there in some form or no form, and it had no form in the beginning. This is not my invention, this is implications of this equation. I have, of course, researched this topic, because what about massless particles? M equals mass, and what about massless particles? There is no M, therefore the result should be 0. Well, this equation E equals mc squared is a simplified version of the complete equation that also takes the massless particles, so-called, into account. As I understand it, the massless particles are defined by their basically kinetic energy. As long as they run, they exist, they stop running, they stop existing, or give their energy to something else and stop existing, like that. But equation or this principle still fits for them. Now, let's get to the basic point of metaphysics. This big E. Now, we should explain the concept of panpsychism that was mentioned in the podcast by this metaphysics guy. We know that consciousness is a real thing. It exists in the universe. And now we need to decide when does the consciousness arise? Where does it come from? Is there any fundamental division between unconscious dead matter and the conscious living material being? Where does this extra property arise? Somewhere, somehow, we don't know. Again, the simplest possible thing, and therefore probably the most correct by this method, is to say that the consciousness never really arose. It was there since the very beginning of the universe. And there wasn't much to begin with. There was only this basic energy. So if consciousness is like the basic property of this energy, or one of its properties, then the universe is in some way conscious. Of course, this consciousness gets displayed when there is sufficient complexity. Does it mean that a piece of rock is conscious? Well, according to panpsychism, it is as conscious as it can be given a rock's level of complexity. We are conscious because we have this complex and very orderly brain, and the electricity, the living energy, can play alongside and can follow these circuits, and this is what we call consciousness. The consciousness was there to begin with, but it was only seeking a canvas to paint itself on it. That was a poetic metaphor, that wasn't like a real claim. That's the simplest thing we can say. The consciousness does not arise, it was already there. And when the consciousness was already there, and it had to be in the beginning of the universe, maybe even latently before, how do we call this thing? And you guessed it, yes, it's God. The panpsychist God, or the pantheist or panentheist God, is the simplest possible notion of God. It is very popular today among philosophers. This is basically the God of Baruch Spinoza, or possibly Teilhard de Chardin. Spinoza was like 17th century, Teilhard de Chardin was 20th century. Please note, this is not the same as saying the universe is God. So that would be like having superfluous concept, either universe or God. It's not like that. This is building the argument from the bottoms up, from the simplest principle to this. This is what panpsychism means, and what panpsychists are trying to say to Stefan Molyneux. For some technical reasons, this worldview precludes time travel and parallel universes and different timelines. If there are like different dimensions, they had to be like different ecosystems of particles, like a life in dark matter basically. They can't be like separated different spaces. There's just one space. And this is why I find this worldview, or this model of the universe, more correct or more rational than this vanilla reality presented by the mainstream scientific establishment. But all I have said in no way contradicts the scientific knowledge. This is also a part of the confusion in the beginning with the call with Stefan. The caller said that his model of the universe brings more intellectual satisfaction. In his place, I would not say intellectual satisfaction, I would simply say Occam's razor and simplicity. Efficiency, basically. We have good feelings about efficiency, but efficiency is more than just our feelings about the universe. Now, this is just a very short and simple introduction to metaphysics. There are many other things to do in there, and some of them are very interesting, and we are trying to change ourselves to fit into the universe better, and then that has benefits of its own. In my experience, to become a master of metaphysics is very useful for a philosopher, and that means discovering God in a non-theistic, objective way. If you spend some time on Wikipedia, you will discover that none of this is new. There are thoughts like just I described in most, if not all, major world religions. The similarity is really uncanny, because it's the simplicity. People generalize, they have to simplify, and they gravitate towards this model of reality. So this covers the subject of this podcast and where it would go if the caller was able to express himself more simply. Next time, I hope there will be next time, but I will focus on what is it good for, all this knowledge, all this thinking. I think that ethics is more important for a philosopher, and for the world it is. But we will talk about the concept of enlightenment, not the 17th century, but the spiritual enlightenment. And I think a philosopher that is spiritually enlightened is more useful and more resilient to media wars and shitposting and so on than a non-enlightened philosopher. This is why it is a worthy topic for you philosophical people. Thank you for your attention. Bye bye.